this spat between India and Canada which has taken place. It's got many business owners, people who have children studying in the US, studying in Canada, a little worried.
The world needs to understand about India is you have to do what is right for your country. It will be a give and take on views between Canada and India. I think it's important the U.S. stay out of that and other countries stay out of it.
Everybody knows that there's no way that Canada could have done this without America being on board.
Trudeau, with his 19% approval rating, is trying to appease the National Democratic Party to stay in power. And with the election coming soon, the odds are that he will not get re-elected. As things transition in Canada, this will die away.
If President Trump wins the election, there is a little bit of anxiety about immigration and about tariffs.
Both Democrats and Republicans are united as far as how to deal with China. China is seen as a challenge, and India is seen as a friend by both parties itself. So the style may shift if Trump comes in. It may be more transactional than structural, but from an overall perspective, the relationship with India will keep on going upward trajectory.
I want to ask you about Tesla. Are they coming or not coming to India?
In fact, I saw Elon Musk 2 weeks ago in New York, and I asked him, what are the plans? And he says,
your leader is setting the pace where India will become the top economy in the world. And it will be India's century, where you're going to exit this century probably twice the GDP of China and 30% more than the U.S.
Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. My guests today are John Chambers and Mukesh Aghi of the USISPF. The USISPF stands for United States-India Strategic Partnership Forum. It's a non-profit, non-governmental and non-partisan organization that aims to strengthen the relationship between the United States and India. John Chambers is the chairman of the USISPF and former CEO of Cisco. And Dr. Mukesh Aghi is the president and CEO of the USISPF. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mukesh. I hope I have the permission to use your first names.
absolutely.
We would be honored. I don't want to be formal, and I definitely do not want to be old, so it'll be fun.
Thank you. So, John, let me begin with you. You've been bullish on India and said that this is not only going to be India's decade, but India's century. And you've been saying that for several years. I also heard that you've been to India somewhat 50 times. Mm-hmm. So, tell me a little bit about why you think it's going to be India's century, because not many in India believe it's going to be India's century.
Well, India tends to at times be the toughest on itself of any country in the world, but that is changing, and I think the young people are beginning to really believe it will be India's decade and India's century. In terms of why I believe it, I put Cisco's second world headquarters here all the way back, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I believed in the country always, but it was a slow follower. Now it's starting to be a fast leader. And if I were to bring it back to one thing, in addition to the demographics, the young people are the future of this country. They're optimistic, they believe in themselves. The IITs are generating 1.2 million engineers a year for the country, et cetera. But it's the leader. Anytime I see a country move or a company do really well, in technology terms, it's a Bill Gates, it's a Jensen at NVIDIA, it's a Larry Ellison at Oracle, it's a Satya at Microsoft now. The same thing is true of government leaders. And what Prime Minister Modi brought was a predictability. He had a process using technology, a digitization of the country, that he grasped would change the economy for the whole country. And then he took it a step at a time, almost like a business person would do. And he shared with his citizens why this was important to him. Why was digital India manufacturing important to him? Why were smart cities important? Why was investing in startups important, which would generate jobs 10, 20, 30 years out, not much in the short term, but that is the future of India in terms of the startups. And then he looked at how you bring in FDI investment and bring in current jobs in the direction. So I believe in the man. The very first time I met Emmanuel Macron in France when he was the finance minister, called my wife and said he will be the next president of France. And then about a year later, he said, John, I'm thinking about running for president. I haven't shared with anyone other than my wife. What do you think? And I said, you're going to win. And he came to my house, but I'm able to have a little bit of good fortune of identifying leaders who can change a country or a business. I was also, when Macron came to India on the state visit, he brought me as part of the French delegation, even though I knew more people on the Indian side. Where am I going with this? Your leader is setting a pace where India will become the top economy in the world, growth-wise, of major countries. It's already there. And it will be India's century, where you're going to exit this century probably twice the GDP of China and 30% more than the U.S. But he also grasped that a U.S.-India partnership would be great for India, great for the U.S., for all the citizens, and also good for the world. So visionary.
You spoke about 15 years ago when you were with Cisco and you came in. What did you think would happen in India then? Because Prime Minister Modi wasn't at the helm of affairs then. So what did you see in India 15 years back, and what do you see now? What is the change?
The change has been huge. 15 years ago, you had your very large multinational companies, the Emphasis of the world, the Tatas of the world, et cetera, Reliances, but you didn't have a startup engine. And to be very candid, in a gentle way, while you had tremendous talent, and I came to India for the talent. If the prices were the same as the U.S., I still would have come to India and recruited the talent here. But what is different now is the country's learning how to dream and make dreams come true. So before, it was more investment in terms of having my resources here. There were almost no startups to acquire, and I acquired 180 companies at Cisco. There wasn't that entrepreneur spirit and dreaming. That has changed. And so what is different, we're becoming the innovation leader, a fast mover that the rest of the world will emulate.
So I'm going to ask this question to both of you. Okay. When you were in India, when the USISPF is in India, you would have noticed this spat between India and Canada, which has taken place. It's got many business owners, people who have children studying in the US, studying in Canada, a little worried what's going to be the future, because then now you're talking about sanctions, you're talking about Five Eyes. So those who are doing future planning, business houses which are doing future planning of trading with India, with America, with the Five Eye countries, they're a little concerned. Which way is this going to go? So tell me how you see this.
One of the many things I think the world needs to understand about India is you have to do what is right for your country. And the alliances you have with the U.S., with Canada, with Europe, also with other players such as China and other parts of the world, you've got to do what is in your national interest and your national direction. And so I view the issue in Canada as an issue between India and Canada in a transaction. Now, it's an interesting transaction, but it's about national integrity and what was really important to India's future. While I think people watch that, what you see is almost the reverse around the world. India is becoming the country that many people look to align with. I was in a small country called Guyana, down in northern Latin America, and the president said, "John, I'm thinking about getting dramatically closer to India, and Prime Minister Modi is coming here in the not too distant future." He was so excited. And I didn't tell him that I knew him at that time. I said, "Well, why are you excited?" He's a visionary. It's a country that I trust, and we have huge oil reserves, and they have 40% diaspora from India. So what I'm sharing with you is for those people that might see that occurring, it will be a give and take on views between Canada and India. I think it's important the U.S. stay out of that and other countries stay out of it, and they'll work through it. There are going to be times when friends disagree. There are times even when my wife and I disagree. She's usually right. But that doesn't mean you won't have a good long-term relationship. So the people that ask you that question, I would say that's a transactional question. Important to Canada on some issues, very important to India's national integrity and trust, and that the two countries work it out.
Mukesh, I'll take that question to you, and especially because you worked in India too. You know how you were with IBM, you've worked in India, you've seen how everybody gets a little antsy when these things happen. And, you know, I mean, everybody knows that there's no way that Canada could have done this without America being on board. So it's a little worrying.
Well, you have to understand that it's a domestic political issue which is percolating into a state relationship between Canada and India. And I strongly believe Trudeau, with his 19% approval rating, is trying to appease the National Democratic Party to stay in power. And with the election coming soon, the odds are that he will not get re-elected, but he still wants to hold on to that position itself, and leveraging NDP is critical for his staying in power. So I think I would say that as things transition in Canada, this will die away. As far as U.S. goes, yes, U.S. Canada have a very strong relationship, but you got to understand, business people, business leaders are responsible to their shareholders. They look at what is good for the business itself, and they see India as a partner from a global perspective, not only from de-risking from China, but also looking at India as a market opportunity. So I don't think you should see this percolating down into India-U.S. relationship. You should not see that U.S. investors will stop investing in India. I think the market opportunity is tremendous. So I think with time, this will die away and we'll forget about it also.
How do you deal with emotional issues with facts? How do you deal with factual issues with emotion? Let me deal with this with facts. We just came out of a meeting at USISPF. We had many of the top corporations in America and India represented there. Almost everyone in the room is increasing their commitment to India. Almost everyone in the room is working with India on multiple fronts. Your leaders in India are able to outline a vision of where the country is going to go. There's consistency in the programs. Only the third time in 40 years, first time in 40 years where somebody has a third administration that can make a difference. Continuity, predictability is very key. Not only pro-business, pro-democracy in the direction. The standard of living for the young people and all citizens here in India will be the fastest growing in the world over the next decade and maybe for the next century.
You mentioned that in your speech yesterday
Yes.
when you talked about jobs in India and things. So that's true. Let me come to one point which Mukesh picked up was about elections and things like that, because now your country is going into election mode. If there is a regime change in America, if President Trump wins the election, there is a little bit of anxiety about immigration and about tariffs. Do you see a bipartisan support towards trade with India, towards defense partnership and various partnerships with India, regardless of which party comes to power in the US?
Well, I think you have to look at a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that both Democrats and Republicans are united as far as how to deal with China. China is seen as a challenge, and India is seen as a friend by both parties itself. So the style may shift if Trump comes in. It may be more transactional than structural, but from an overall perspective, the relationship with India will keep on going upward trajectory. The relationship with Prime Minister Modi has been very, very positive. In fact, a week ago, he talked so brilliantly about how good the leader, Prime Minister Modi, is. So I don't think you will see any stress on the relationship. I think the relationship will continue in a positive manner.
I think it doesn't matter which one wins in terms of will Prime Minister Modi get along with both of them very well? Yes. I'm a Republican. I know that right after the election, a number of the senators plan to come here to India because they see this as a natural alliance. India is probably the only thing that both political parties view the same way, our partnership here. And China is the only thing that both political parties agree there's a problem with the U.S. on. And India's walked that line remarkably well. So I actually like almost everything I see going on here in India. And going back to your original question, I think at times in India we don't have the confidence we should in the future. And we control our own destiny. And I think the destiny can be really strong with the U.S. and India working very tight together.
John, you mentioned China, and I have a quote here which you said, the Indian economy is projected to be 90 to 100% larger than China's by the end of the century. Are you hinting that people should invest in India rather than in China?
I wouldn't say hinting, I'm very direct. Okay. So, but also understand, I work for Wang Laboratories. I work for IBM. I saw the transition. If you're in mainframes, you didn't move to mini computers, you got left behind. I then worked for Wang Labs, a Chinese company in many ways. And then the internet followed that. Dr. Ang Wang taught me a lot about China. I love China. I did high-end manufacturing. I brought outsourcing manufacturing, high-end technology to China. Jiang Zemin, my average meeting with was 2 hours a day. China at that point was a win-win approach. Tough negotiations, but they always looked to how the other side won. China versus the U.S. today, I'm only talking China-U.S., we're talking about a win-lose scenario. And most businesses have lost trust in China. So your currency as a leader, as a country, is your track record, it's the relationships you form, and it's trust. And so if you look at India, the track record over the last 10 years has been very predictable. It doesn't mean there won't be bumps in any relationship.
And tough negotiations.
Both sides negotiate tough. Mukesh and I would like to see that easier on both sides. It's the relationships. And if you would have watched the leaders, everyone except Prime Minister Modi himself, and he wouldn't normally have been here, came in and talked about openly, what are we doing well, what do we have to improve on? That instills trust. Trust is what allows you to do things, to dream dreams and make it happen that others cannot. We trust the India-U.S. relationship. Trust trumps everything else, and I use that word in seriousness. So it won't matter which one it is. Both of them will get along well, and I think you'll see delegations from both political parties coming here to understand the future of the U.S.-India relationship.
Mukesh, you've seen negotiations getting into a tough spot at times and then pulling out of that. What is your experience been? John has spoken about this pretty often, about with interactions with Prime Minister Modi, and many others in the USIPF have spoken about it, USISPF have spoken about it. What is your takeaway about the Indian side negotiation? Are they as tough customers to deal with as China?
Well, I think the whole style has changed. You have to understand, when the Prime Minister came in and he went to the Paris Accord, nobody expected him to sign the climate bill.
True.
Nobody expected. And he sent a message that we will take bold decisions, we will take risk, and we'll remain committed to that risk. After that, if you look at the only country which has honored the Paris Accord has been India. I mean, the rest of the world has kind of drifted away. So I think that has sent a message to bureaucracy, to political leadership, that take bold decisions, I will support you. And what we are seeing is the negotiation with FTA, with UAE, with Australia, and they have moved forward. So I think what we are seeing is a sense of confidence and comfort among bureaucracy to be able to take decisions, and that process continues.
If I may take off on that question as well, I probably have more experience in China than most anyone else in our room upstairs, and China was tough to negotiate with, but in the time that I was there, from 1994, and I bet on China in a big way, it was always tough negotiations, but they wanted to find a win-win. That no longer exists. It's a win-lose mentality. In the negotiations in India, often early on, going back 15, 20 years ago, it was tough negotiations, but there wasn't a common view to how both sides win, because you've got to have the relationships, you've got to have the track record and the trust. That exists now. So I don't worry about there being tough negotiations. I think what both sides are learning, you've got to get to an outcome quickly, because changes that take place, I believe India will lead in AI. I believe India will become the startup engine for the world. 17% of the IPOs are done in India now. Who would have thought that 15 years ago? There weren't even any startup IPOs or unicorns. So this country's changing, and I think to be a part of that is what those citizens ought to believe. And I say that lightly because I can be critical when appropriate, but I really like where we're going.
Let me get to AI, because you're an investor too, and let me ask you, how many companies have you invested, AI companies?
Well, first, about 180 companies at Cisco. Most people viewed us as the best in the industry on M&A and making it successful. I've invested in 6 major AI companies. Most of them are already unicorns, starting 8 years ago, including 2 out of India, Unifor, and then you'll see a company called Safe Security that will be led by Saket Modi, no relation to the Prime Minister, although I like his last name, on security. But out of my entire portfolio of 22 companies, 60% of them are led by Indian diaspora, either located in the U.S. or here. Most startups in America now view their second location as India, talent-wise, et cetera. Most India startups view their second location U.S.
Bangalore and all.
Everywhere around. But also,
no, what I mean is what President Obama had once said, right, about being Bangalore.
Bangalore,
Oh,
yeah.
Bangalore.
You're right, yeah.
Yes and no. I think what it is it's now of a more win-win as opposed to win-lose mentality for each job. But every one of my 22 companies is now AI. If your company is not AI enabled, I don't care if you're manufacturing, I don't care if you're finance or healthcare, you're going to get left behind. For high-tech companies, if you're not AI differentiatable, you're going to get left behind. And I know there have been some critics who have said, well, India isn't going to be able to play in the AI market. First, they're wrong, but secondly, if India doesn't play in a big way in the AI market, not only will your technology industry never emerge out, your traditional business won't either. Ask Tata.
No, Sam Altman said that last year, and he said that Indians can't build OpenAI. That's not possible. How would you react to that?
I would say there's nothing that India and the U.S. working together can't lead in, including AI. And the Prime Minister said it well. Perhaps that stands for America and India innovation together. But you have to do this. And anything this country's put its mind to, they can do. But the nice thing about what Mukesh and I really believe in is a true partnership between our countries where we can move so fast together. So I'm pretty good on I have 9 unicorns out of 20 companies. That's more than many countries have, and I'm a small investor. So I think India can be the leader in AI. I think it works better with the U.S. together, and I think we're attempting to do something no one's ever done in terms of the closeness.
In India, there is a little bit of anxiety that U.S. and China are driving AI governance, and the discourse is around that that AI is used to advance strategic interests, and there our paths might not be in tandem.
I think India will always do what is in its best interest. And this isn't you're either with the U.S. or with China. If you look at democracies, AI about freedom is what the future is about. AI will change your life, mainly for the better, but we can also introduce some changes on productivity. And so I think what you're going to see is an open standard will win, and an open standard only exists in a democracy. That's why I pulled out of China. And I was, in 1993, the biggest bull on China in the U.S. high-tech industry.
Yeah. Mukesh, I'll take that question to you. You once said that if India keeps growing, the rest of the world grows. But the Global South now looks at it that they are not part of that growth story when it comes to America and China planning their future ahead, especially with regard to technologies, sharing of technologies. And they would like India to be, well, not represent them, but be a champion for their cause. How do you see this?
No, absolutely. I think the danger is U.S. China making a deal, and the world basically focuses on G2. And I think that's where India sees the risk also. And that's where India is trying to champion the Global South. If you look at during COVID time, which country gave the vaccines to the world? It was India, not the United States.
Guyana, as you just mentioned, was one of the countries.
Yeah, one of the countries itself. If you look at the medicines, the pharmacies, Africa, the Global South gets all of the pharmacies here. Education-wise, India is giving more scholarship than any other countries to these region itself. So I think India is becoming a champion. I think India also at the same time dealing with the aggressive China. We have the BRICS summit coming in, and China is going to basically focus on de-dollarization of trade between these countries. India will stand firm, deny that itself. So I think what we are seeing is India playing a very pivotal role, aligning with the value system of the U.S., aligning with the global system, and making sure that China does not steamroll Global South from that perspective.
And this alternative to the SWIFT system that Russia is also talking about, how do you see that?
So I think it's going to be difficult, because if you look at the whole dollar transaction goes to SWIFT system through New York and comes back. I think the danger is if you basically keep on putting embargoes on nation, leveraging that SWIFT system, you lose the basically value of that. And I think that's where India has to play a pivotal role, making sure that that's not used as a specific nation issue, but uses as a platform to trade, more transfer of currencies itself. So I think India has to be a little more assertive there, basically with the BRICS and of the Global South itself.
A global conflict, we are at this situation where there's Middle East on fire, where there's the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where nothing seems to be sorting itself out. How do you see the India-U.S. partnership going with these global conflicts on? and expanding?
Well, first of all, if I can take a step back,
Sure.
In Prime Minister Modi's first term, I talked, because have been fortunate about picking leaders, and you can see those leaders, they're going to be amazing. I said he's one of the top 3 leaders I'd met in the world at that time, and I've met them all. I'd say at the present time, he is the best leader in the world. And I said at that time, first he'd lead India, then he would lead the region and emerging countries, and then he'd become, on the global stage, to the benefit of India, one of the top leaders. So you now see Prime Minister Modi and his team working in each of these conflicts as appropriate in what's India's best interest. And I think that's where the real power resides. Now, to the second part of your question, tying back to your earlier point about are people who are going to be nervous, I'd like to tell you that what we're seeing on global conflicts, the issues on inflation, COVID, economies, and election is a temporary blip. It's not. I think this is the new normal. So you've got to say, how do you navigate through this, and how, to the best of your ability, do we try to keep the global conflicts from spinning out of control? But I don't think if we were to look back a year or two from now, we will say this was an abnormal time, unfortunately.
Okay.
Can I
would
just
you like,
ask? Yeah,
go ahead,
I
Mukesh.
think you have to look at India is the only country which has maintained relationship with Putin, and also with President Biden, and also with Zelensky, and also participating in BRICS and SCO, and has been able to deal with that connectivity. So his trip to Moscow was where he briefed Putin and tried to understand where he wants to go. His trip to basically Kiev was to brief Zelensky, understand his objectives. So I think you have a prime minister who is connected, at the same time briefing everybody without playing a, I call, aggressive peacemaker role, and so there are no setbacks. So I think India is very much connected there.
Yeah. Also, there's this fear that, this, as we saw with China when it came to, with Japan, where you weaponize relations, trade relations, where you weaponize strategic issues. So this is the fear that with all these conflicts going on, it could impact on immigration. That's another issue which I touched upon earlier. How do you see that going with one of the niggling issues, tariffs and immigration? Are we making progress on those 2 issues, India and the U.S.?
Well, I think tariff issues both with India and with the U.S. I would say if you look at U.S. puts tariffs on goods coming out of India, and India's putting tariffs, but you don't expand the economies by putting tariffs on each other itself. I think we have to find a common ground. And I think the next thing we have to look at is, can we drive an FTA? And I know it's a complex issue because it has to be approved by the Congress itself, and where Republicans and the Democrats are divided, you can't get a consensus. But more, so our suggestion from USISPF was, we have a quad country where we have 4 geographies connected together militarily. And basically, if you look at those 4 geographies, are roughly $35 trillion economy. Japan has a FTA with the United States. Japan has a FTA with India. Australia has a FTA with the United States. Australia has some kind of a FTA with India. What's missing is FTA between India and the United States. So you don't have to do FTA there, but if you just get all those 4 countries and create a common market, that'll be a good start.
I want to ask you about Tesla. Are they coming or not coming to India?
In fact, I saw Elon Musk 2 weeks ago in New York, and I asked him, what are the plans? And he says, I really want to come. That's the only market where you have basically kept the Chinese out. So it's a good market for us. He's trying to sort out his own issues itself, but he will come.
I will ask you a googly question. You know cricket, that's why I'm saying googly.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about what you think about NVIDIA, and because we spoke about AI and things. So what do you think about that, and how will it impact on India?
So first, NVIDIA is to AI what Cisco was to the internet. If you wanted to know how the internet's health was, you just looked at Cisco's growth. We became the most valuable company in the world by a large magnitude. We became extremely profitable. We did a good job of balancing the interest of all countries and all companies, and we were trusted very much. NVIDIA is exactly in that same spot in terms of AI. On AI, however, there's going to be a lot of money coming into it even more. So NVIDIA is going to get a lot of very good challengers. But going back to leadership, leadership is about somebody that has a vision and strategy. Jensen has that. It's about a leader who can attract talent and move with aggressiveness. He does that both in investments and acquiring. It's about a leader that can solve a problem quicker than their counterparts do. Now, do I think a AMD, a Broadcom, and many other people will come at him competitive-wise? Of course. And if they don't, the market isn't big enough, because if the market isn't big and really growing. But I think NVIDIA has a very bright future, and while some people are saying, wait a minute, it's way ahead of itself, I think you look back 10 years from now, you're going to find this company is still the leader in AI.
And India, where do you see us in which niche will we fit in this? Learning models, data, where?
I think if we fit into a niche in India, we've misexecuted. The U.S. has no intention of fitting into a niche. AI, in my opinion, is the number one issue. Countries that lead in AI, their stock markets will be more, AI will drive the market, their defense will be better, their electronics, their cars, their every device will be AI enabled. So you've got to have more than a niche strategy if you're going to be a large force economically, which India clearly needs to be. So I think India needs a total AI strategy. And while I love the fact that we kind of have a sovereign wealth fund here in India for AI, it's not near big enough. And I think we've got to look at it in terms of an overall strategy for the country. Good, slow progress, but I think we got to move much faster.
Much faster. Exactly. This is what I wanted to ask you, Mukesh, too, that there are so many industrialists on this, on the USISPF forum. What do they think? That did we get in too late? We're making investments about 25 billion or something like that in chips. What is the feedback that you get? Do you think that India isn't doing enough, hasn't done enough? Has it come too late? Or is there scope for doing more in the next few years?
Well, it's never too late. You recall the plant we had up in Punjab, which got fired in the 80s.
Yeah.
India was building like 300 nanometer chips there itself. So I think...
and then we didn't do anything for the next 20 years.
We didn't do anything in the next 20 years. I think the important you have to understand is India is building what I call the legacy chips. All the plants are between 15 to 60 nanometer. They're not going below that itself. And those are the basic chips, all the mobile phone, all the refrigerators, all the microwaves to acquire those. So I think the demand for that will continue. That's one critical factor. Two is that's where India can replace China, providing those chips to the rest of the world also. Because US will stop buying those chips from China, and India plays a pivotal role. So I don't think it's late. I think we need to accelerate the process, invest more, but we're on the right track here at the moment.
I'd separate it into two issues, though. The first is the semiconductor issue. And I know all the CEOs, almost without exception, of the major semiconductor players. Doesn't matter if it's Pat at Intel, Jensen at NVIDIA, Lisa at AMD, Ying Cristiano at Qualcomm. All of them are looking very carefully about coming to India, and I think most of them will. Now, we've got to move faster on making it an easy installation and growing. So India must play in the semiconductor area, and to Mukesh's point, he nailed it. The players in the US, but also in Europe, want a secure supply chain. You saw what happened with just an issue, a simple pager that was in the distribution, what that could do. So I think everyone in the world now realizes that if you don't have a good semiconductor core industry as your base, you don't have supply chain security. Now, the second part of your question about AI, that one's up for grabs. And people forget, it sounds like you and I talking today like AI's been out here for a decade. 2 years ago, before Microsoft's move on OpenAI, I couldn't even get most CEOs to talk about it. Now, CEOs in the room that we talked about unanimously agree they have to move.
They're Indian CEOs or American CEOs?
Both.
Both.
And they agree they've got to move, but it's so early innings. And this is where I would not say the game's over, but we have to move fast. And again, I'm going to keep reiterating the same points. Working together between our two countries, we can move faster than either country by itself. That's what we ought to do. Now, will we have the courage to do it? Will we move fast enough to do it? I think so.
Okay. My team tells me that you follow cricket a bit.
A little bit.
Who's your favorite Indian cricketer?
My favorite Indian cricketer is actually the Ambani family and how they have 3 of the companies from that side. And what I'm favorite about is that many people don't recognize it. When countries make an economic breakaway, they usually do it with sports at the same time. Russia, clearly with ice hockey, China, clearly with the Olympics, America, post-World War II, clearly with the Olympics and focus on it. I think what you're seeing is India is going to lead in cricket and is going to create an environment. Cricket's already the 3rd most popular sport in the world. The fact that it will be in the Olympics coming up in LA, and then hopefully when India gets the Olympics here, it will be another example. So this is where I think sports and the future of a country often roll together. Even in Guyana the other day, the president had to excuse himself because he was going to the cricket game.
Okay. Mukesh, tell me, you've watched India and you've worked here, you watched businesses grow, moving into the liberalization era. You've seen all that happening. When you bring in businessmen from India, some of them with Indian origin, some not, what are the changes that you see today than when you were here?
I think one is the pace. The pace of change has accelerated in every aspect. But the biggest change I see is the shedding away of the colonial mindset and having a confidence in the country. When you look at the young youth, they're confident. They want to do startups. If you look at 20 years ago, a typical IM or IT graduate would try to go to a multinational company. Now they want to do startups. So to me, that's a dramatic change, and that's where we believe that this is going to be a century of India, because you have a youth which believes in itself.
You brought startup companies I met a couple of them.
Yeah.
You brought them, they're part of your organization.
Yeah.
What role do they play in the USISPF?
So a big role. For example, we look at how we can help the startups gain the U.S. market. We have 400 plus multinational companies as part of our consortium. So it's not about the capital, it's not about the IP, it's about access to these companies. We provide that. But they also basically play a role of changing the technology, changing the organization values, not the value system, but the process itself. And they're creating jobs. We have done a study for every person they hire in India, in the US, they hire 8 people in India.
Okay.
So it's a win-win value proposition between the 2 countries. So startups are playing a pivotal role as we build the relation between the 2 countries.
John, if I was to just ask you to pick 5 startups that in India you're keeping your eyes on?
I'm going to name 5 of my own startups, and let me tell you why. And by the way, most all of them have either were founded here in India or Indian diaspora leading them. Probably the hottest enterprise startup company called Unifor. It does customer service, about 180 million ARR. So one of the most successful examples, and is going to move across to all of the enterprise marketplace. A company called Pindrop. You've heard about the deep fakes going on in media.
Yeah.
They're the ones that solve it 99% of the time. So they're the ones that solve the issue with Biden in New Hampshire, with the Harris, with the Elon Musk area. And it's growing, if you can imagine, at a pace that normally would take you 5 years to grow. With their new technology on this, they've hit a unicorn status pace in 12 months on it. I like very much Saket Modi's company, a young Indian, very aggressive, but what he's done on cybersecurity, cyber risk analysis, and then tying it back to insurance, I think is a model for the world in terms of direction. I like a company called Now. My prior head of engineering at Cisco and I formed that. They are the next generation internet capability that uses AI, network as a service, and security integrated together in terms of the approach. And then a company called Rubrik, which was here at this session. They are the best at ransomware backup. We had those issues with CrowdStrike, by the way, a very good company, and I know both the CEO and CFO, and they will come back very strong. But every location that had Rubrik in place came right back up. So those are 5 that I think if you wanted to keep your eye on, that I know very well, so I'm not talking to your investors or potential investors, that I believe in and I bet on it. in terms of their future.
When you speak with the Indian government, when you speak with Indian investors, Indian companies, do you get the sense that there is still that little bit of suspicion, especially with regard to tech giants, American tech giants, monopoly of theirs? Do you, question to both of you?
So I think there's a suspicion in the U.S. of the tech giant, and it's the same suspicion here itself. I think in a democratic world, in a capital world, dominance by few companies is not healthy for the economic environment. You need to be able to have startups come up rather than being absorbed by them and kill their new ideas itself. So suspicion is in the US and also in India and Europe.
In Europe, okay.
Historically, the leaders in a prior generation of technology never were leading in the next generation of technology. That's been true from mainframes through the internet, through the cloud. This time it's going to be an exception. Whether it's Microsoft or Google or Meta or Amazon or Apple, they're all going to go after it aggressively. What I think we all have to be aware of, they cannot misuse that economic power. And they're each going to spend probably $100 billion on it. Are the U.S. companies and startups, are they very much aware of that? Absolutely. The competitors that my startups worry about are those big players, not their smaller competitors. So I think both countries have the concerns in terms of protecting the startups, because that's where innovation occurs. And if too much power is encapsulated into one or two companies, I don't think that's good for the future of the economy.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mukesh, for coming and speaking to us on the ANI podcast. And I hope I get to meet you on your 51st visit to India.
Well, that might be quicker than you think, so I would love doing it.
Soon after elections, I guess, when you are heading to elections. In India, we are in a perpetual election mode. But you headed to elections next month, so all the best for that too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Smita.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for watching or listening to this edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. Do like or subscribe on whichever channel you have seen this or heard this. Namaste. Jai Hind. Click here to watch the previous episodes.